And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our Digital Cafe training for digital editors. This is Penny Reardon speaking. I should know most of you on the call. I'm the Director of Digital Audience Engagement for Gatehouse. This is a 30-minute training, so we are going to get started and go straight through this. As always, you can ask questions in the chat box, and we'll pause throughout or at the end to answer any questions. If there are any questions we can't answer, we'll just respond at the end of by the end of the day. We're also going to send out this deck, which has some links in it to some of the things we'll talk about, so you'll be able to see some real live examples. And we also have, let's advance this, there we go. We also have Jean Hodges on the call, Senior Director of Content. Most of you know her. And then we are going to get started. So for those of you who joined last week, we talked about, we had two trainings, one for editors and one for reporters, talked about why it's important to tell your story, ways to be more transparent and engaging with your readers. We did some examples for reporters to dig into. And with today, we're going to talk about 4 types of reader questions and how to respond. For most of you, these questions fall into these 4 areas. Questions about the paywall, that's probably been the most overwhelming reader complaint or feedback we've gotten in the last year, particularly with a new paywall vendor in the piano experience. There are a lot of questions that we get about explaining sources or reporting in a story. So why did you not list the name, or why did you have this piece of information? I think sometimes we assume readers understand journalism more than they actually do. Of course, fake news has been a huge area of topic in the last year, and then accusations of bias. So we're going to go through some concrete examples from both inside of Gatehouse and throughout the industry on how people respond to these questions. So first, wanted to set the scene a little bit with a note on tone. A lot of the questions that we're responding to, especially around the paywall or questions about our reporting, they'll either come in the comments on the bottom of the article page, or they'll come in our Facebook comments. And I have seen many, many questions from readers. I know you guys have seen a ton as well. Sometimes they're not in the best tone. I've seen people be rude, be sarcastic, call you names or what have you. I think it's important just to remember that you're not just responding to that one commenter who may be rude or sarcastic. So if there's something about some snark that they may have, there's a lot of snark on social media these days, it's important for you not to respond in that same tone. All of the readers are watching your response, and you'll even see in some of the examples where a newspaper brand will respond in Facebook and then 15 people will like it. So people are watching your responses. We just need to make sure we're always staying above that negative tone in conversation and being respectful to our readers, even if they are not being respectful to us. I know that unfortunately can happen sometimes. Okay, a lot of questions about the paywall, the meter, just the experience around paying for news. It feels like a new thing in the digital world, yet we've always had print subscriptions for generations now. But readers are getting a lot of questions about it. And if people are asking why they should pay, don't be afraid to tell them why. You can explain the parameters around the meter. You can share examples of great journalism that you're doing, why it's important to pay for journalism, talking about things that you do in your community. It may feel like it's self-explanatory, but I think we do need to go above and beyond with our readers to just really tell our story better. And then a couple of things that I've noticed that's a really easy response is people will say, well, why are you telling me that I have to pay? I don't want to pay. Well, in all of our markets, they get a certain number of free page views a month. So really, we did give them something for free, but they used them all up, which is a great thing. They want to keep reading news. So here's some great screenshots of some examples both on Twitter and Facebook that I'm going to go through. And any of these, I would encourage you guys to adapt, copy and paste, adjust with your own language, because this is all stuff that people are using across the industry. So David Skock, actually, Skoke, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, used to be at the Boston Globe, but is at another organization right now. There was some tweets going around from Jay Rosen, who's an industry critic, actually I think more complaining about the paywall, and I thought this was a really good response. It's an effort to build a loyal and engaged audience. And he's also explaining the reason why we have this, which is to replace advertising dollars. So I think it's totally fine to be transparent with your readers about the business model and explain that and say, hey, look, we think this is a more sustainable model. You all don't like ads anyways. We know folks are using ad blockers and things like that. So this is really a move towards sustainability for our business. So I think it's really fine to say these types of things to readers. So here's a little bit longer response, but this is from the Tulsa World, also a comment on Facebook. You can see that the number of likes at the bottom, it's only 3 there for that one. But what they talk about is actually the value of the community, and they also talk about the value of the paper. So very clearly state your prices. It's totally okay to explain the digital subscription value and what that gets you. You can even equate it to something else like a cup of coffee or something equivalent in price, and talk about the work that you do in communities. So this is a long response, but a really good and thoughtful one. And that's certainly language that you can have on hand in a doc and just copy and paste when you get these types of questions. Here's a shorter example. There's an organization called Gather. Some of you might know Joy Mayer, who does a lot of work around reader engagement. And this came actually out of a discussion on reader engagement and responding to reader questions. And I really like this one because it sort of equates the business value to another type of concept of paying, which is, think of it this way: I came into your restaurant to eat and then I bumped into the bill. I mean, really, if someone's visiting our website, they're consuming our content, and then at some point we say, hey, by the way, you've consumed enough, time to pay up. That's a certainly reasonable ask to have as a business. This is a commonly used example on Philly.com, and I think this is a really good way to talk about the people, the fact that there are actual journalists in the community doing work. A newsroom of 250 people costs money, and quality reporting about our community is worth supporting. This really breaks down what you get for the work of the journalist and what you're paying for. And also, I think it's defending the work of journalists, which I think sometimes we're a little afraid to do, but saying reporting about our community is worth supporting, to stand up for yourselves and say, hey, this is worth it. We believe we're adding value. This is something that we think is worth paying for. Another response from the Seattle Times, they keep kind of a canned response on hand that is a variation of this, that they do specifically respond to readers in the Facebook comments. Of course, you can see that Seattle Times logo. As most of you all, when you do interact on Facebook, you're interacting as your brand. And they also use sort of the value equation. A subscription is a relative bargain, $1 for 4 weeks, $4 a week, that's a coffee a week to access everything we publish. And then also, again, relating to your community, reminding folks, hey, we're the hometown daily newspaper. We bring you a lot of news that's important, and we think it's worth supporting. Excuse me. So that's just another thing that you can sort of copy and paste and keep in mind. And I also like the example at the end, or the text at the end that says, thanks so much as well. Okay. Nancy, let me read your question real quick, and I'll take a second to answer it. Most complaints I get is that if we're going to charge, we shouldn't be putting it on Facebook. Oh, that's interesting. They call it clickbait and accuse us of trying to trick them. I explained free views, but inevitably. So, actually, I did see a response from this, and I'll see if I can share it afterwards. Someone, I think it was another reader who actually responded back to the Facebook commenter complaining about the fact that, hey, we're reading this on Facebook. And then I think someone said, well, you followed this news organization on Facebook for free, didn't you? So I think it's sort of a way, if you're sort of explaining to them that, hey, there are hundreds or thousands of people that actually follow us on Facebook every day, and they do pay, that's not a problem, and that's something that we want to distribute our content there. But once you visit our site a number of times, and again, emphasize, they do have free views, but then after a period of time you're asking to pay, is a reasonable ask. So Nancy, I'll send that response over after, but yeah, I have heard that from folks. They think everything should be free on Facebook, which we know is not the case. Okay, good question. Feel free to ask any other questions in the chat. Excuse me, I've got a little bit of a cold here, and we will continue to answer them. Okay, moving on to the next one. When readers ask questions about your work. So this is something I think we could really do better as an industry, and this just gets back to making sure you do respond to comments. There are always those people that are going to complain and gripe and sort of troll you, especially on Facebook. But if there are legit questions that readers are asking, we should be answering them. So if there are questions about, I think the most common things are, especially in breaking news, when folks don't know if a story is going to be updated, or it seems sort of thin on maybe the first, excuse me, on the first version of the story. And then also things like printing names or publishing arrests, not publishing names, different definitions around that. We sort of assume that readers understand our rules when, do we really explain them to them, or can we expect them to sort of remember everything that we've done, or remember everything that defines what we do? So don't assume they know who you called and who you didn't call. Don't assume they don't know, who returned your calls. Even maybe explain sort of if you're working with a state agency investigation, sort of explain that process about reporting and what you've asked for and what types of information you've received and haven't received. So I think why does this matter? So it's just really important to be transparent about our work and to explain to readers why we have these parameters, why we have these rules. And I think that also explains the value of our journalism and will hopefully convert those folks to actually reporting or choosing to subscribe. So this is an example from the Fort Collins, Coloradan. The screenshot on the left is the full Facebook post showing men being arrested in a prostitution sting, and then the screenshot on the right excuse me, is a zoomed-in view of the Coloradans' response. One of the questions was basically, why did you not arrest or not print these names? And the Coloradan explained this, so they say, we do not report the names of individuals accused of crime unless we plan to follow the cases through. I know there's been a lot of discussion around that. And I think they do a good job explaining it and sort of laying out this whole process, and also the role that reporting on these names plays in the community. And I think it's important to be transparent about that in crime reporting especially. And look at the likes on that. So that's 17 likes. And I think that's really a testament to the fact that everyone's watching. So when the Colorado makes that comment, you're not just responding to that one reader question, you're responding to all the other folks that are following along. This is another good example. I think we underutilize editorials sometimes to explain our news gathering process. And I know a lot of folks will field complaints from readers on AP stories. I've heard that either for things in print or sort of headline changes, and I know we've got some complaints here at the C&D for that. So why not take an editorial to actually explain your relationship with the AP and talk through what does it mean to be an Associated Press subscriber? What does it mean when we print that? How do we treat this type of information versus local news? So this is the News Tribune, I believe, in Jefferson City, Missouri. And the editor sort of explained this whole experience with AP. And then he also talks about, local is what matters more to us than anything. And here's how we treat local stories differently than we treat AP. So using an editorial to explain your reporting process to readers is super helpful as well. Okay, here's an example from the Columbus Dispatch. This is, of course, one of our markets. This is from a breaking news story. Again, don't assume that your readers are following everything you do with bated breath, particularly with the way the Facebook algorithm may not surface your content all the time. Excuse me. Folks might see an update, and then they click away and they don't come back to it. So be sure to be transparent in the comments about the work that you're doing. So take some time to say, hey, here's the information that we have now. We're going to keep the public informed, and we're going to keep updating this story every time we have new information. Excuse me. So the next one, fake news. We've just had a ton of questions about fake news. Obviously, people are kind of slinging that phrase around all the time. It can be really frustrating and concerning to see readers use that phrase. So a good way to respond to that is I think sometimes we take on the whole burden of the phrase fake news, when in reality, say in a situation where we might be quoting the police chief, or if it's a fact and figure statistic from the budget, those are local sources. Those people are in the community. So say the police chief is actually just reporting basics on a homicide or some other straightforward crime story. Would the reader call the cop or your police chief fake news? They might, but they might also think twice about it if they're realizing, that you're just doing the coverage from these readers in your community. And also being transparent, excuse me, about how you handle corrections. It's really important to take the time to actually respond in both print and online. We actually did talk about corrections a lot in the first training, so if you haven't checked that out, be sure to go back and listen to that. Here's a good response from the News and Eagle. I believe this is also in Colorado, and this is a good response to talk about being a watchdog and their role in your community. So I think it's important, too, to just remind folks that you're there to respond to your readers and to hold elected officials accountable. And that, excuse me, is certainly not fake news. Okay, another thing that we have seen, and many papers from Gatehouse participated in across the country in August, was the editorials defending a free press. There were 400 newspapers that participated, and you can use that editorial language when responding to fake news. So don't be afraid to go back and check that and take the chance to actually copy and paste some of that language into a canned response that you could use that would respond to readers. Here's a map of that view from the Boston Globe. They tracked all of the 400 editorials across the country, so if you want to read those for inspiration, you certainly can. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Jean, who's going to talk about how to handle accusations of bias.
Thanks. Can you guys hear me? If not, then just if you're hearing silence, just put it in the chat box. But if not, I'm going to keep going. Thanks, Penny. And now Penny gets to rest her voice, which is sounds like it's fading. So we also, in comments, sometimes do get accusations of bias. And this is a huge problem for us, is that people believe that our news is biased. And in a survey that was done in, I think it was March and April of this year by Knight Gallup survey, and it was published in June, it said that 62% of people believe that news they see on TV, read in our papers, and hear on the radio is biased. Just so that you don't feel too bad about it, they think that social media is even more biased, estimating that 80% of the news there is biased. So I guess that's a little bit good news, but still really bad for us, that more than half the people who read our stuff think that we're biased. So here's an example of somebody basically in comments on Facebook saying, how about cutting the bias? You guys always focus on the negative, especially when it has to do with President Trump, and that you're divisive and not objective. And so anyway, something that probably a lot of you who are in comments have seen some version of that. And this was on the Facebook page of a Cincinnati TV station. So the response, I think, was good in many respects. So Penny talked before just setting this all up about tone. And instead of, trying to be combative or even clever or anything like that. It's, you know, just taking a really kind of almost taking the high road, taking a gracious tone, you know, thanking people for their feedback, and then acknowledging that, you know what, there is a lot of partisan information out there, but then distinguishing what we do from that partisan information. So, I mean, there's InfoWars, and then there's us. We're totally different, you know. We're not, you know, we're not making things up, and we're not trying to slant things in a certain way. We're not saying, you know, we're only covering, you know, liberals or Democrats, even though a lot of people accuse that, you know, us of that. So, and one of the things too that I think Penny mentioned, but is really important, is when people, you know, try to make these really broad accusations like, oh, you guys are biased. Well, ask for specifics, and we could do that in a very nice way as well. You know, we work really hard to present things in a way that's unbiased. But if you have examples, please share them with us, because, you know, we're doing the best we can to, or not even doing the best we can, but, you know, we are working hard to present information to you that's going to be useful to you, and I'd be happy to engage with you about examples you've seen from us. So just getting specific. Most people don't have anything specific to say, so they're just lumping us in to everyone. So, you know, so I think that that's true too. But, you know, one of our goals is not necessarily to divide people, but to tell the truth. And sometimes the truth is great for the benefit of all. In our ethics handbook, which if you guys need a link to the ethics handbook, please let me know. Reach out to me at jhodges@gatehousemedia.com. That ethics handbook is also part of the compliance training that we do, and so you're responsible for knowing it. But you can certainly quote from it to say, our goal when we do this, when we write, is to minimize harm for the community, for the greater good. So sometimes, though, it's going to harm one person. So if a person was arrested, they may not like that we report on it, but that might be very useful information for the greater good. So just explaining that to people, how we get, you know, why we write certain stories, why some of our stories are negative, can really help. But if your commenters are saying you're biased or the media is biased, some of the things that we went over there, acknowledge that some media are biased, but your publication works to tell the story straight. Certainly, too, we need to be really careful that we're labeling opinion content versus news content. Sometimes people will say, see, this is an example of your bias, and it's a column or an editorial, and we all know that, well, yeah, those are opinion pieces that are part of what we offer, and so we need to make sure that we're labeling those. I see online, I still see us using print devices in terms of headlining, so it might be a last name colon and then a headline for a columnist, which is something we do in print all the time. It kind of makes sense sometimes because you have a column sig there that shows you who the person is, but online it really doesn't make a lot of sense. What is that last name about? People don't understand that, I think. And so I would say, you know, if you're doing a column and it's my last name, it would be like Hodges colon and then the rest of the headline. I don't think people know what that means. So I think it's something we need to rethink in terms of our online headlines. You can always write a different one in the net header. So, but our news stories, we are not the same as some of those other organizations that are biased. So you differentiate yourself, and Penny talked about this a little bit too, from national news. We live here. We care about our community. That's a good response to bias as well. You know, I've seen people say, you know, my kids go to school with your kids. I mean, this is something that we care about. We're part of this community, and we're here to report stories for you. And just a few comments that I want to look at really quickly because it's good to see you guys engaging in the chat over here. So let me just take a look at it. So when I said ask for specific examples, you know, Alan Shaw was saying that people say, "Oh, I'm not going to do your job for you," and there's not much. Sometimes, you know, you need to know when to play the game and when to leave it. I mean, again, a lot of times readers will even come to our defense, but you know, you could respond to say, you know, just again say how important it is to us to present news without bias, or whatever the question is that you're trying to do, and leave it at that. Or you could just leave it, because at some point people are just being jerks, and there is really no good response to some of those folks. So yeah, and then in terms of so anyway, that's good. And then Nicole says, be sure to choose the opinion category in Saxo. That is really important too because it puts the word opinion in your URL. So thank you for Nicole to say that. We also changed our story pages so that there is a tag on every story in the opinion section. So if people come in sideways through that story, it'll say opinion at the top of it. So that helps us to distinguish that online. But if you're on social media, it's also good to use your chatter, use that information in the status above your photo and headline to say, hey, our opinion columnist, blah, 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 does this, just emphasizing that. So also, sometimes people will say well, I don't see you guys doing very much on this, and this story isn't very, deep or whatever. But if it's an ongoing story and an important story in your community, you certainly can put in comments extra links to answer questions. So always be looking for opportunities to promote your work. And then explain why you tackled, also fact-checking. If you do fact-check stories, and I think on a lot of our investigative pieces, we spend more time editing and fact-checking than we do on daily stories, but a lot of the complaints we get are on those bigger pieces, I think, like why are you doing that story? So be sure that in comments you're pointing that out, that we are fact-checking, and also explaining why you tackled that piece. So it's easy enough to say City Hall is burning down, and I covered that story. But why did you focus on the mayor here? Maybe people in town are friends with the mayor, and so it's like, man, you're out to get the mayor. So if you're explaining why you're doing that story, how you came about that story, that you got some tips, that things were not right, or you were looking over budgets and you saw some stuff that didn't add up, and started poking around, and that you're doing this again for the greater good, I think that helps people understand the process more. So if comments, and another thing, just making sure that you show your work. How many sources did the reporter contact? How many documents did they examine? How many FOIAs did they ask for more information? So that's hard to do on a big story if you haven't been tracking it all along. So I would suggest using Google Sheets to track each comment at each person you called, each document, that in keeping track of pages of documents so that it's easy to add up at the end. And then FYI, just so you know that what we're doing in this regard, and just in terms of building trust and credibility, which is also helpful outside of the world of comments, Gatehouse is working with NewsGuard, and this is an organization that is rating news organizations based on their credibility. We're working with them to ensure that we have a good rating on NewsGuard. There are a lot of these organizations that are popping up. One of them is the Trust Project too, and that one's getting good SEO benefits, so we're also looking at that. But we just want to make sure our websites are among the ones that get these good ratings, because we are real news, and we know that. We work hard at this. So outside of comments, what can you do? I think we need to hold ourselves accountable. And there's a great, it's basically a way that you can do an online test. It's through Harvard, and you can test yourself for implicit bias, because we know that we don't come at every story without any bias. And it's good to know what your problems are so that you can guard against them. So I encourage everybody to take that and see what you get. Also, helping your community learn how to detect bias is a really good idea. And so how do you do that? There are news literacy programs. You can just Google them, but also Mark Baldwin, who's the editor of the Rockford Register-Star, has done a lot of great work with libraries and schools in terms of news literacy programs, and he's a great person to talk to. If you don't know him, reach out to me and I'll set up a call. He loves talking about this stuff. And really, that brings us to the end. Does anybody have any questions? Just pause for a sec. You can just drop them in chat. And if not, too, you can reach out directly to Penny or to me. And after this, you're going to get a link to the video of this. So if you want to just listen to it, it's 30 minutes. Link to slides so that you can go in and grab some of the language that was used and adapt that to your situation. And we are all at the top of the hour. we're all done. So thank you very much. I hope it was useful. If you come up with ideas or even difficulties, please do reach out to us because sometimes we can point you to specific language. So with that, thanks very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.